Welcome back. Hopefully you've enjoyed this morning's sessions and have gained some knowledge based on best practices and experiences valuable to grow one's business. But stay tuned. We have more in store this afternoon with additional sessions, as well as our opportunity zones. Now, I'm very proud to say that we have a special guest. I want to welcome back Justin Driscoll, NYPA's interim president and CEO, to introduce our keynote speaker. Justin.
Thank you, Eric. Well, it is my great pleasure to introduce Brian A. Benjamin, the 78th Lieutenant Governor of the state of New York. We're very happy that he's been able to take time out of his very busy schedule to be with us today. First, let me share a little background on Lieutenant Governor Benjamin. He previously served as state senator from the 30th district, representing Harlem, East Harlem, and the Upper West Side of Manhattan. First elected in 2017, he became well known for his leadership in such areas as public safety, criminal justice reform, and affordable housing. Guided by his pragmatic approach to government, he sponsored the New York City Rainy Day Fund legislation. This law enabled New York City to save funds in revenue stabilization accounts, thereby preventing cuts to essential services in times of economic weakness. He also successfully pushed for the divestment of state public pension funds from private prison investments and introduced a bill to ban state chartered banks from such investments as well. Additionally, his proposal to keep rent-controlled apartments affordable was a key part of the history-making Tenant Protection Act of 2019. This legislation came at a particularly appropriate time as it provided relief during the pandemic. And in 2020, then Senator Benjamin's historic bill, the Eric Garner Anti-Chokehold Act, passed along with a suite of police reform legislation after the murder of George Floyd. Now, in addition to these impressive achievements, we are very excited to have him as our Lieutenant Governor and look forward to what we know will be equally impressive achievements in the Hochul administration. Welcome, Lieutenant Governor Benjamin.
Thank you so much, Justin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for your role at the New York Power Authority. And I want to thank John Canali, VP of Strategic Supply Management, Eric Alumani, Senior Director of Supplier Relationship Management, Allison Danielowitz, Program Manager, Lourdes Martinez, Supply Diversity Specialist, and Susan Craig for helping to organize this conference. You know, this past September, Justin, I got the chance to meet Daniela Piper, the Western New York Regional Manager at the Niagara Power Authority, where she showed me around. It was incredibly impressive. And, you know, as someone who comes from Harlem and communities where, you know, power and energy aren't the things that we focus the most on, she was very kind and patient with me as she showed me how the amazing things we're doing there. And I want to thank you for all that hard work. You know, we know that as New York continues to lead the country in clean energy, that NYPA is going to be a big part of that picture. And you want to make sure that it's not just a cleaner future, but a more equitable one. And that's why you're having the Supplier Diversity Expo today. And I'm excited to know that you're looking to promote more MWB suppliers for the authority, because, you know, these are billions of dollars that are on the table. And when Governor Hochul asked me to be her partner in government, we talked about how it's so important that everyone had a seat at the table, that as we are transitioning New York's economy, particularly towards clean energy, that everyone gets a chance to participate in that growth, which is an exciting time and an exciting opportunity. And today's a part of it. So let me just say very clearly, Governor Kathy Hochul and myself, we are deeply committed to making sure that you have a part in this process. And this is so important that we get you sort of organized, get you to hear some of the different strategies and approaches. How do you work with government for some people who haven't? How do you deal with who are the players at NYPA? Just so this can become something that is more easy for you to feel like is doable. You know, New York State has been doing a really good job at including MWBEs. New York State right now has the highest MWBE procurement rate in the country at 30.51%. We are contracting with minority and women-owned businesses, and we expect that to grow with NYPA. However, the program is not working as well as it should. People cannot get certified as quickly as possible, and some of our procurement officers are having a problem finding suppliers, hence why we're all here today. Just so you know, the governor and I and the state of the state and the budget are providing, looking to provide increased resources up to $11 million in additional funding to improve the MWB program and ensure timely and efficient processing of MWB certifications for qualified businesses. We know, we've heard the stories about how long it takes for MWBEs to get certified in the state, and we're providing the resources to help with staffing to ensure that we get through that process. And when there are appeals being made, administrative appeals being made, we are providing resources to make sure we have a new unit within ESD that's going to be dedicated exclusively to this, so people have an opportunity. Let me say, as a lieutenant governor, I previously was an MWBE myself. I worked in an affordable housing development firm where we contracted with the city, and I can tell you it wasn't the easiest process then, but know that you have someone who is sitting in the lieutenant governor's seat who understands this issue, who's concerned about this issue, and will work with NYPA and work with ESD, particularly our MWBE group, to ensure that the talented firms out here, the talented suppliers out here who have the skills needed to help the state as we move towards 100% clean energy, that you get the opportunity to participate, to be a part of the process and get the contract so that you can grow, and then you can hire people in the community and subcontract to firms who are diverse, who have not had a chance to do that. And that is how we grow New York. That is how we will grow the state. And I want to thank Justin again at NYPA for inviting me to say a few words here today. Thank you.
Thank you for your support. It was such important work.
Well, thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Thank you, Justin, for your time today, for joining us. I know you have busy schedules. Your presence today is a true testament that you care about our MWBE, our SDVOB, and local business community, and helping establish opportunities to grow the state. So thank you from the bottom of our hearts. We appreciate you taking the time today. So at this time, thank you, appreciate it. So at this time, I want to introduce our next speaker. I want to introduce Dr. Fred McKinney. Dr. McKinney is a co-founder and principal of the economic consulting firm BJM Solutions, LLC. BJL Solutions has worked with large and small organizations since 1999. Dr. Fred McKinney was the Carlton Highsmith Chair for Innovation and Entrepreneurship and Director at the People's Bank Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Quinnipiac University School of Business from 2018 to 2021. Dr. McKinney earned his PhD in economics from Yale University in 1983. Dr. McKinney has over 30 years of experience working with MWBEs and large data sets. Dr. McKinney served as the Managing Director of Minority Business Programs at Tuck from 2015 to 2018. Prior to coming to Tuck, Dr. McKinney was the President and CEO of the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council from 2001 to 2015. Pretty impressive. Dr. McKinney taught full-time at the University of Connecticut School of Business from 1987 to 2001. At UConn, Dr. McKinney taught economics, entrepreneurship, business statistics. He also worked as a junior economist at the White House, Council of Economic Advisors from 1977 to 1978. Dr. McKinney has also served as a consultant of Fortune 500 companies in the areas of supplier diversity. He's worked with over 100 diverse businesses owners on developing winning marketing and operational strategies. He has published 4 books on supplier diversity and MWBE development, along with over 60 articles and editorials. Pretty impressive resume. He's been recognized by many organizations for his work in minority and business development. And in 2017, the U.S. Department of Commerce Minority Business Development Agency presented McKinney with the Ronald H. Brown Leadership Award for his support in minority businesses. So at this time, I will welcome Dr. McKinney. Can't hear you at this point. Not yet. Not as of yet. You may have some technical issues there. While Dr. McKinney is getting his volume set up and handling some of the technical issues, I just do want to pause for a moment and just want to say thank you for all the attendees. It's been a tremendous event. I've been looking at the chat. I love how engaging a lot of the folks have been thus far, asking questions. It really seems like the folks that have attended today, it's been meaningful thus far, and we certainly have a lot more to engage. So we appreciate you sticking around, hanging out with us to learn more about NIPA and canals and all the great work that is in store for us within New York State. We want to develop relationships with you. We want to get to know you better. And again, I'm going to go back to developing new relationships as well as existing. Yes, Dr. McKinney, I think we hear you now.
Okay, I changed the microphone, so it's not my headset microphone, but can you hear me okay?
Absolutely. We hear you well. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, and we'll turn it over to yourself.
Thank you. I want to say good afternoon to all of those who've joined us. I also give Eric and Lourdes and Allison and the whole NIPA team and Supplier Diversity and in the executive office, thank you. And also have to shout out to my friends up in the Buffalo area for the only football team that actually plays in New York and their success so far this year. So, but it's an honor to be with you here today. You know, in my 30 plus years of working in minority business, I've seen a lot. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of supplier diversity. But instead of going back and looking at the lessons that I've learned and history has taught me over that time, I want to share my time with you today to do three things. I want to talk about two projects that I'm working on now. One with MBEs and corporations, one with a specific corporation, and then another one which is has to do with my writings and communications about the intersection between politics and diverse business development. And hopefully, you know, I can bring these three things together, and there might be of some value to the audience today. But I do believe that you know, the things that I'm working on are relevant and very important. So if there's one takeaway from my message today, it is that each generation of minority firms, diverse firms, and each generation of corporate leaders has to realize that the struggle for justice, economic justice, and justice in business is an eternal struggle. You know, there's no end to the struggle for economic and social justice. When I was president of the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council in the first decade and a half of this century, I frequently would come across corporate members and others in politics who would come up to me and say, you know, it really would be great when we don't need organizations like the Greater New England Minority Supplier Development Council and other organizations that are designed to bring about social and economic justice in business. And, and I would often think about that and what would be the proper response. And I knew that it was what I just said, that this is an eternal struggle. I mean, I would like for it to be over too, as I'm sure you would. But the reality is history shows us that each generation has to fight that struggle. And that's what I'm gonna dwell on a little bit on. The third topic that I'm gonna cover today is the political aspect of minority business development and the role that suppliers as well as corporations have in that struggle. So, I'm at the point where I'm preparing to pass on this baton to this next generation, and to let them know what I've learned, but also to fortify them, but also to let them know that they have to fight this struggle as well. There's a not so insignificant consolation prize, though, of struggle, in that it sharpens the mind and the soul. So I encourage you to get engaged and involved with it. So the two projects that I'm working on, I'm going to start with a project that was the result of an article that I recently published, and it's being republished again soon in a magazine called Diversity Plus. And the article is about the pass-through businesses. And pass-through businesses are a particular type of company that has plagued the minority business community and minority business development since its inception in the 1960s. And so, in the early days of minority business development, the big problem for minority business, one of the big problems for minority businesses, that it was that they competed against organizations that weren't really minority businesses, and those non-minority businesses were getting the business. And so, we called those businesses fronts. And it was a fraud that took the form of a non-minority entrepreneur who created a business or sat behind a business that looked like a minority business, but in fact was not a minority business. And so these businesses had a particular look and feel, and sooner or later, it a lot of the organizations, particularly in the government sector, got wise to these businesses and began to ask the types of questions that were necessary to ferret out these front organizations. And really, that was one of the motivations for the creation and formation of organizations like the National Minority Supplier Development Council. It wasn't the only one, but also for state organizations that were involved in certification, so that they would make sure that the businesses and entrepreneurs who are eligible for these programs were the ones that actually benefited from these programs. I've done a lot of research on these types of businesses, and I was looking at one Washington Post article from the late 80s, where they had uncovered a front business that was operating out of Baltimore, and that particular business was in the steel business. And so they had won several $million-dollar contracts with local and county and even the federal government. And there were a few minority firms that were legitimate minority firms who kept losing out to this business. And it was those minority firms that brought this questionable firm to the attention of the government that the firm was selling to. And I thought it was interesting in that article, the response of the front business when confronted by the Washington Post. The business owner, when asked, well, what is your proof of that you are eligible for this diverse business status, this diverse minority business status? And I quote, he told the Washington Post that they should take a look at his mother. She looks like a squaw. And so, that was clearly a case where, the firm was a front, and they lost a lot of that business, but took the efforts of a certified diverse business to make that known. So that's an article that I published on these front businesses. And so when I look at pass-throughs are a little more sophisticated in their approach, and a little more difficult to discern what their status is. But it was, again, brought to my attention, this time not by a certified minority business, but it was brought to my attention that is by a Fortune 500 firm who asked me to look at a particular business, and they just didn't think that the business had the right, didn't feel right, didn't smell right, didn't look right. And so they didn't give me the name of the business. They gave me a little bit of information about the business, enough to sort of to do a little research on the business. And I got back to them and I told them, I said, I think that this business is a pass-through, and I don't know if they're certified or not, but I know if they crossed my desk as the president of G&E MSDC, when I was president, I'd probably raise a red flag and insist on some sort of more in-depth investigation of the ownership status of the business and also their business practices, because it was the business practices that were the concern of the for me as a certifying body on the legitimacy of the business. And so I told them, I said, I don't know if they're minority or not, but they're clearly, it's a pass-through. So and then they asked me, says, you know what, it would really be helpful to us as a corporation and maybe some other corporations if you could write a paper on pass-throughs. And so I wrote that article, and now I'm doing a follow-up study on pass-throughs. But I want to talk a little bit about some differences in what pass-throughs are not. And one of the things that pass-throughs are not, they're not brokers. Okay, and we're probably all familiar with brokers in our professional and business lives. You may use an insurance broker, and when I was I also, and Eric, I didn't have this in my resume, but for a number of years while I was also involved at UConn, I had a coffee business, and my coffee business, we use brokers. And so, the broker in coffee, the broker in insurance, I was the client. And so the role of the broker is to do the best for the client, to find the best quality for the best price for that client. And so that was their role. And they weren't captured by any particular company. In a pass-through, it's different. In a pass-through, the pass-through business essentially is a glorified salesperson for a particular company that does not have the status to qualify for a certification by either a public sector organization or a private certifying body. And so often with these pass-throughs, we find that they share critical infrastructure. Including office space. I mean, I remember declining to certified businesses because the certified business was housed within a non-minority business. Now, I understand from a business perspective why that might be attractive to both parties, but that doesn't mean that they should be certified. And so that was a problem. You also have some other sort of telltale signs of pass-throughs. You often find that they share back office support. They share shipping and logistics. You also will see, and I saw this in the particular case that was presented to me, that the pass-through business had a website that looked very much like their sponsor's website. And so you could see that there was some seamlessness between these two companies, and it was almost no line between the two. And these companies get into trouble. And so I was actually going back to my council days in 2014. I was called by the Department of Justice because they were working on a case in Connecticut, and I'll name the name because they're one of their brothers is now pretty famous, and it was a company called the Manafort Brothers, and they were out of Connecticut, and they had a DOT contract, and the DOT uses the DBE certification because of federal highway. And this particular company, Manafort, is not a minority company, but what they did is to secure the contract, they promised that they would use some DBEs on the contract. Well, Manafort Brothers didn't want to use legitimate DBEs, so they created some DBEs, and they got an unwitting or maybe a witting participant to form a company that was literally totally owned by that Manafort Brothers organization. Skipping to the bottom line, the Justice Department ended up filing a lawsuit against Manafort. They sued them. Manafort paid a fine of $2.4 million. The DBE was put out of business, and the contract was relet. So there are consequences, and that's not the last or the only or the highest fine that's been paid in this fight against fronts. So that's something that I've been working on. And as part of that, I'm actually conducting a national study now where I'm surveying corporations to get their input on what their experience is with contracting or experiencing these types of pass-through businesses. And the surveys are coming in. It's really interesting what I'm seeing so far, and it's confirming what I had written in that earlier piece, that these types of businesses do exist. They exist in all industries, and it just tells me that organizations like NYPA and the state of New York need to be vigilant in their certification efforts, and for DBEs and MBEs and diverse businesses of all types, you need to be supportive of that effort, and that is an important step in an important role of certification. So that's one project that I'm working on right now. The other project that I think is also relevant to the Expo today at NYPA is work that I'm doing with another corporate client, or with one corporate client. And this is a project to assist, it's a healthcare company, is to assist that company to do a better job at contracting with diverse suppliers. So if any of the people on the phone or on the call today are supplying goods and services to hospitals, I'd like to know who you are. Send me a note, and I can get it in the chat to reach out to you. But my role with that company is to help them identify and do business with more diverse suppliers. Hospitals and healthcare are an interesting industry. Hospitals are often the largest employer in most cities around the country. And that's true with my client as well. They're the second largest employer in the state. It's a system. They're the largest employer in many of the cities that they operate out of. And many of those cities are cities that are majority minority cities. But if you look at their supply chain does not reflect either the community that they serve or their workforce. Their workforce looks very different, much more diverse than their supply chain. So I've been tasked to assist them. And what I'm finding with that work is that there are three things that really determine the outcome, the performance of a corporate supplier diversity program. I talked about this last year when I was asked by NYPA to talk, and it has to do with three characteristics of any supplier diversity program. The first is leadership. Is that if you don't have leadership in a corporation or an organization, then your supplier diversity program is probably not going to be that strong. And so it's really important. And you saw that today. You saw that with the remarks by the interim CEO, the head of procurement, the lieutenant governor is on board. So you've got leadership here, but you don't have it everywhere. And so I ask my clients a series of questions about leadership and the participation of leadership in the supplier diversity program. So it's more than just say, oh, we have one or we hired somebody, but what does that leadership do? How do they interact with the supplier diversity effort? And it really must be significant, and it must be transparent internally and externally for the supplier diversity program to work. Secondly, I look at the processes that are in place. How does a corporation perform the tasks of improving supplier access to the corporation? And that's a critical component. The mechanics. How is the sausage made? What database do they use? How do they interact with the local certification organizations to identify suppliers? Do they develop suppliers? How do they develop their suppliers? How do they communicate with suppliers? How do they create the opportunities? Do they understand that not many diverse suppliers can bid on a $50 million project, but they can bid on a $5 million project, and even more of them can bid on a $500,000 project. So how contracts created? How are they bundled in order to accomplish the goals of the organization? And there's this sort of unwritten fear, and when I hear this a lot from corporations, particularly from the procurement community, whose task it is to buy stuff that the organization needs for the lowest possible price for the highest quality, and to do that in an efficient way. And so they often equate efficiency with bundling large contracts. And the reality is many of those large contracts are not done exclusively by the company that they're contracting with. There are probably dozens of contractors under that prime contractor. And so it's a matter, you don't have control of it. And in effect, what happens is if you don't pay particular attention to the size of these contracts, the corporation outsources its supplier diversity function. And to me, that's never a good thing. And so I look at processes. And finally, I look at the outcomes. I mean, you can have a lot of stuff going on, a lot of activity, but if the outcomes aren't there to confirm what the goal is, then you got to question, the other two things: leadership and processes, and also personnel. And so if it's not working out, something is wrong. So you look at these things like spend as a measure, but you also look at the distribution of that spend. If all of an organization's spend is just with a few firms, and that's how they meet their numbers, that's great for those firms that are in, but it does nothing for the broader community of diverse firms that are knocking on the door. And so the company, they can say publicly, we've done a great job, but they also may have a public relations problem because there are going to be so many diverse firms out there who are on the outside looking in, who are going to say, well, somebody might be getting some work here, but I'm not, and anybody I talk to is not. And that might be both of those things can be true, that the company can be meeting its goals at the same time that the majority of companies that are knocking on the door aren't getting in. So those are important outcome measures. So I've looked at that from the perspective of this hospital system, and so some interesting results. And I also pay close attention to what's called the $1 Billion Roundtable, and so that is an organization that was created 20 years ago, and the $1 Billion Roundtable just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And in 2001, the organization essentially set as a entry point to get in that you had to buy $1 billion of goods and services from diverse businesses in order to become a member of the BDR, $1 Billion Roundtable. And so what we see is that those first companies included, household names, and it's probably not a surprise to many. I'll just run them off: AT&T, IBM, Walmart, Verizon, General Motors, Ford, Chrysler. Those were the initial charter members of the BDR. And now they've moved from 10 members to 28 members of the BDR. I'd be happy to share those with you if you want to send me a note, or you can Google them and find them for yourself. But what's important to note is that the number of companies has grown, but also the total spend has grown. So just in the last 5 years, those BDR companies have grown their sales from about $75 billion to over $115 billion today. And so we know from the performance of these large companies that you can do supplier diversity well, and you can grow your business, and you can do it in a way that increases the spend with diverse suppliers. Now, there's another reality. Most corporations will never be in the BDR, no matter how hard they try. And I love NYPA, but NYPA with annual sales of about $2.5 billion is never likely at that rate to get into the $1 Billion Roundtable, because it's unlikely that they spend $1 billion with outside contractors in total. So the goal for all corporations is not to be in the $1 Billion Roundtable, but there are lessons from those companies that are in the $1 Billion Roundtable that I think are applicable to any corporation that is interested in supplier diversity. And those lessons, again, are based on leadership, processes, and the measurement of real outcomes. So the work that I'm doing in the hospital healthcare system is I think of interest to some of the MBEs and diverse businesses on this call, because I'm sure that if you're successful, NYPA is not the only business that you're knocking on the door, or the only business that you're currently are serving as a supplier. So one of the questions you might be asking the corporations that you're knocking on the door is, what type of supplier diversity program do they have? What does their leadership look like? What are their processes? What are their outcomes? And a not insignificant process, by the way, is getting paid. And so how long does it take to get paid by a potential supplier? A potential client, because we know that not every client is a good client. If a client doesn't pay you, they're not a good client. They might not be a client at all if they don't pay you. So these are the things that you need to be aware of when you're looking at growing your business with corporations. You should be doing your own analysis on the quality of that corporation's, that potential client's supplier diversity program and the support that they have. So the final thing that I wanted to talk about is some work that I'm doing in what I would call political economy. And so I'm an economist by training. I did a PhD in economics at Yale going back to 1983. Economists are experts in a few things, but we have the right to talk about just about anything. And so I exercise that right on a regular basis as a columnist. And so one of the pieces that I recently wrote, I've been writing a lot, like a lot of columnists have, on sort of the current political climate. But I take an economic approach or an economic analysis approach to political analysis. And so the recent piece that I wrote that I wanted to share with you is something that I've done on congressional districts of all things. But let me tell you why it's important, and why I think it ties into supplier diversity and minority and diverse business development and corporate supplier diversity. You know, I think that many people believe that, you know, congressional districts were something that was written into the Constitution, that's where it comes from. Well, the reality is it's not. It's not written in the Constitution. Congressional districts come from someplace else. And I remember in 2017, I took a trip down to Mississippi, and I was really interested in Mississippi politically and economically because of the demographics of Mississippi. And while there, I met with Eric Johnson, who at that time was the president of the Mississippi NAACP. Today, Eric is president of the National NAACP. And what was really interesting to me was that at that time in 2017, Mississippi had 5 congressional members, including Benny Thompson, who is the chair of the January 6th committee. And they had Benny Thompson, Congressman Thompson, was the only African-American member of the Mississippi House delegation. And Mississippi had a Black population of almost 40%. And so it was kind of interesting to me, how could that be that you could have a 40% share of the population, but only a 20% share of the congressional seats? And the way that happened is because of how congressional districts are drawn. And so, you know, if you know anything about Mississippi, Mississippi is a very interesting state. I was born in Arkansas, and people from Arkansas think that, you know, we're better than the people from Mississippi, but we were both. I was born on the Mississippi Delta, but I was on the Arkansas side. I have no claim of superiority against people from Mississippi, but Mississippi is an interesting state. If you took a line and drew a ruler and drew a line through the middle of the state, you would hit Jackson, Mississippi, in the center of the state. To the left of Jackson is the Delta area. To the right of Jackson is Eastern Mississippi. In Eastern Mississippi, that's where most of the white folks live, in Eastern Mississippi. To the left of Jackson, that's where most of the Black folks live, in the Delta. But if you cut up the congressional districts, not by going north and south, but by going east and west, you slice the state in a way that the congressional districts are majority white. And so that's how you get these types of representations in Congress. So my recent pieces in this have to, you know, I'm advocating for some change. And so I'm actually advocating for a return to the original Constitution that says that, you know, the number of congressional seats is going to be determined by the population in the state. It has nothing to do with congressional districts. And so in Connecticut, we have 5 Congress people. I think this would be good in Connecticut as it would be good in Mississippi. The number of seats you get will determined by the census. If Connecticut gets 5 seats, then every Connecticut resident should get 5 votes for Congress. And that way, I think you will get the type of representation that reflects the population. But short of that, it's incredibly important in today's world for diverse businesses to get engaged with politics. I'm not saying drop your day job. You're trying to run a business. You've got payroll to make. You've got bills to pay. You've got customers to see. You got to do that. That's job 1. But job 2 is to be engaged with the political leadership in your state, in your county, in your town, and to know the people who are making these decisions, because those decisions will and can impact you. And so I would close with that. And I think, again, the lessons that I would share with the diverse businesses and the corporations that are in attendance today is that this struggle for economic and social justice does not end. And everyone has a role in working to move our society to a better place. And things like what you're doing today with participating in the NYPA Supplier Diversity Expo goes in that direction. But in addition to growing your business, I also want to stress the importance of your role and your responsibility as a citizen to be an active participant in our political culture. And so with that, I want to say thank you, and I'd be happy to, I'm not sure how you're going to handle questions, Eric, but I'd be happy to take any if there are any. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Dr. McKinney, for those kind words. I mean, again, you are someone who has a vast knowledge and experience that is invaluable. So we appreciate you taking the time. There's been a couple of questions in the chat that will come up, and we'll follow up with you specifically on those. But again, we appreciate you taking the time to speak to us during this lunch hour. So I guess what we wanted to do is just kind of move on to our next session. So just a reminder, just for the group, to join the sessions throughout the day, please visit the main lobby and click on any sessions. From here, you will be able to view the agenda, join any sessions throughout the day. When attending the sessions, we encourage you to ask questions. Put it in the chat, QA. A number of you have already been doing it, so it seems like it's working. We want to hear from you, so don't be shy. Feel free to kind of ask any questions, and if we have time, we'll have some of our moderators kind of speak to that. Also, if you have any technical issues, please contact NYPA Events with an S at Berman, BERMAN, GRP.com. We'll put it in the chat. And our team will be able to provide some support. Thank you, and see you at the next session, which begins promptly at 12:50.